Can you believe it? But tomorrow marks a year since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. Months of bombing, bloodshed, global economic disruption, and sadly no end in sight to the conflict. The United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres has condemned Russia's invasion ahead of tomorrow's anniversary. But let's get to what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. I'm joined by our correspondent, William Denselow, who joins us from the capital, Kyiv, this evening. William, thank you so much for your time. We know that Kyiv came under heavy bombardment a number of times in the past year. What is life like in the capital today?
Well, of course, Ali, if we cast our minds back nearly a year, thousands of people were fleeing the capital, Kyiv, as Russian forces were getting closer to the city. Now, almost a year on, it's a very different situation. It's a city that can, of course, handle the visits of high-end dignitaries. Of course, at the start of this week, we had President Biden visiting. We've had the Prime Minister of Italy in town this week, and just today, Pedro Sanchez of Spain. So that just gives you a sense of the increased security that is felt here in the capital. And of course, you mentioned air alerts. They do sound on a near daily basis. For many here, they have alerts on their mobile phones. They know where to find shelters. They can go to the subway stations, the metro stations rather, here in Kyiv. So for many, it's a real sense of an unfortunate normalcy, but life very much continues. Restaurants still very much bustling. The streets are quieter than they were before the full-scale invasion. Lights are generally turned off for both power-saving purposes and to help protect from the threat of Russian missiles. But it really speaks to the resilience of people here. For example, for the anniversary tomorrow, officials have switched schooling to being moved remotely because of the threat of an increased missile strikes. But we've heard from the head of Ukraine's military intelligence that say that, yes, they are expecting more missile strikes, but essentially they are prepared for it.
So 1 year on, talk to us about the state of play in this conflict. As you've explained, there is a great deal of international support for Ukraine. We also know that, for example, the UK is considering sending more tanks to assist the armed forces in Ukraine. But we know that Russia seems to be doubling down and is in fact accusing Ukraine of planning attacks on Transnistria, Moldova. But if we look at the fighting fronts, where is fighting concentrated? Is it getting worse? Is it stabilizing?
Well, of course, for many around the world, it's seen as 1 year of the war beginning. But the real reality is that this is nearer a decade of fighting in the east of the country. So what is new over the last few months is the dynamic that all parts of the country are periodically under threat of air alerts and missile strikes from Russian forces, but fighting continues as it has done for nearly a decade in the east of the country. Of course, the city of Bakhmut has become really besieged. Ukrainian officials saying this Thursday that maintains that is still really the hotbed of fighting at the moment. Of course, areas in Luhansk, Donetsk continue to see very fierce fighting indeed. Ukrainian officials saying this Thursday that they believe that Russia will seek to claim control of those two territories by this summer. Ukraine is very much hoping to get those long-range missiles, those tanks, even fighter jets going forward, in the hopes that it can push on with its own counteroffensive going forward. The message from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is that the country will keep fighting, it will win, and it will reclaim those territories that have been taken from it.
And listening to the UN Chief Antonio Guterres, you know, this is something that is very much top of mind for the UN, and we are seeing countries taking sides increasingly. 1 year from now, I mean, is there still a real chance that this could escalate and become a much broader sort of global conflict? What is the narrative around that aspect of this?
Sally, you mentioned issues such as Transnistria, the separatist region in Moldova, once again being in the news this Thursday with, of course, Russia's defense ministry, according to the TASS news agency there, claiming that Ukraine is planning provocations in Transnistria. That, of course, has been refuted by the government of Moldova. And this just comes days after Moldova's President Maya Sandu herself said that Russia was planning to cause provocations in Moldova too. There have been wider concerns when it comes to Belarus alleging that it would get involved in the fight if attacked by Ukraine. Ukraine has maintained consistently that it has no interest in claiming any territory in Belarus. In Russia, its sole focus is on defending its own sovereign territory. And then, of course, there is the NATO aspect and its allies such as Poland, such as Latvia, that share borders with Russia and with Ukraine. So there are real concerns about other nations getting drawn. That is why, of course, we've seen reluctance from the likes of NATO allies, US as well as the EU, to send things like fighter jets, because they fear it could draw further escalation in fighting with Russia, and that direct fighting that, of course, Ukraine's allies have been so desperately keen to avoid.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. That's our correspondent, William Denselow, coming to us live from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, on the anniversary of the one-year start of that Russian invasion of Ukraine.